Hey guys, Tammy here. And in this video, I want to talk about why it's always important to be behaving as if you're getting ready to go to court. Now, this may seem a little bit counterintuitive to you because we tend to relax in between court hearings, but really, we should always be having an eye towards that, even if you aren't currently in court. So, I'm going to explain why that is. Let me remind you, if you like this video, to please click like and also subscribe to the channel so you get notified as new videos come out. Like I said, what happens is we tend to let our guard down in between court. Or if we've never been to court on a child custody case or on a divorce or whatever we're dealing with, then, we tend to just kind of handle things the way we think we should in the best way we know how. Or sometimes in the very beginning, we're driven by emotions of how we're handling these things. I know for me, that was very, very true when I first started going through a divorce. I had come out of a marriage where my husband had 3 affairs at the end of it. And so 3 consecutive affairs, not all at the same time. But so it really just was very emotional for me. And so a lot of times I was just, we weren't in court for a few months. And so I was reacting emotionally. I was reacting in ways that really probably the court wouldn't have liked if they had been involved in that at that point. By the time we went to court, luckily for me, my ex-husband really didn't participate in the process too much or bring too much of that in. But honestly, if he had brought some of that emotional reactiveness of mine from the very beginning into the courtroom, he probably could have hurt my case in a lot of ways. This is why we always need to kind of be behaving as if court is on the cusp, as if we're on the cusp of another hearing or another appearance in front of the judge. And when those hearings and those appearances do come up, what do? We get on our best behavior. Our communication is on point. We're really on top of how we're interacting and making sure we're doing things appropriately. And then that hearing passes, and what do? We tend to relax, right? We tend to fall back into our old patterns. We tend to communicate the way that we historically have. We tend to let our emotions get the better of us, and we kind of fall back into these old ways of communicating and interacting with our ex. And then what happens? Well, a year, 2 years down the road, however long it is, you go back in front of the court and you've fallen back into this relaxed kind of situation. And so then you're communicating and behaving in the ways that you want to do it instead of thinking about how the court would want it done. And then your ex has this ammunition to be able to go in and use against you as far as, if you're being emotional or reactive or all these different things. I'm not saying all this to try to have you be paranoid, oh my goodness, I have to behave as if, I have to behave all uptight all the time. No, I'm not saying that. I think the court wants us to cooperate, particularly in child custody issues, and they want us to be flexible and not be rigid with the other parent, be accommodating with schedule changes, things that are good for the child and that allow the child to have experiences in both worlds and interaction with family in both worlds and all those kinds of things. So I'm not saying be uptight or be inflexible or be rigid, but I am saying make sure that you're following the rules of communication that the court wants us to follow, which is disengaging from conflict, being, I talked about this a couple of videos ago as far as the communication goes about being kind and all that kind of stuff. So you can go back and watch that video if you haven't seen it. But it's important that we're continuing to do those things throughout and not letting ourselves kind of become more lax, because when you're dealing with a high conflict person, a lot of times their behavior patterns are cyclical. I don't know if you've had this experience in the relationship with the other person. I know I had this experience quite a lot in my marriage where, my first marriage where things would be, really good for a while. And then we would just hit this period of just difficulty where everything was an argument, everything was difficult, everything was stressful. And it would just be arguing all the time until we kind of hit this breaking point where we'd have this, kind of explosion of a fight. And then it would kind of reset and he would go back to being nice to me, is how I interpreted it. And he would go back to being nice to me and everything would kind of flow and be okay for a while. When you have those types of recurring patterns that show up, those patterns don't stop just because you're no longer with that person. You might not be in the day-to-day with them where those type of cyclical patterns are impacting you as much, but those patterns are still happening and they're still happening to your child and they're still happening in your interaction with the other person. What happens a lot of times is you have this situation where they're in a good pattern, right? They're in a good cycle. And so you kind of relax your boundaries or you relax your communication or you share a little bit more than you typically would. And sometimes even if the relationship breakup is fresh, I think in those periods of where things are good, you can sort of get nostalgic even sometimes and kind of, miss the other person or miss the relationship. I know that happened for me for the first few months after the breakup. Really, this becomes about drawing your boundary and protecting your own emotional state as well. So again, I'm not saying be difficult or be inflexible or be rigid, but I'm saying once you start to learn these boundaries and you learn methods of communication, always be sort of behaving in the way that the court would want you to and conducting yourself in that way, then don't allow the other person's behavior to change how you're behaving, right? We behave according to our own morals, our own values, and our own way of moving through the world. Part of that maturing and learning and getting better at just being you is learning how to not let another person's behavior dictate your behavior, right? Controlling those reactions like I've talked about so many times. When you're in that situation, even if it's in a positive way, like relaxing your boundaries and kind of being more friendly and open and all that kind of thing, that is still allowing their behavior or their kindness in that moment to change how you're reacting to them. And when you're dealing with high conflict people, you cannot do that because what it creates is that emotional roller coaster. And I know that you know what I'm talking about if you're dealing with narcissist, borderline, those types of high conflict personalities are just notorious for this emotional roller coaster. And I was on that roller coaster for probably, the whole length of the marriage, but very much so the last couple of years as things were sort of coming to a head and the relationship was coming to an end. It will take very little for that emotional roller coaster to be triggered and to start back up. When you're experiencing that roller coaster, then what happens? Then you're exhausted, then you're drained, then your life is always in upheaval. Again, you have to be holding those boundaries and holding those rules of communication, the rules of interaction, and reacting the way the court would want you to in those situations, because number one, it's going to protect you. Number two, it's going to protect your child. Number three, you're always going to be ready if and when a court motion is filed. And you're not going to be scrambling at that point to try to clean up your behavior or look good or look cooperative to the court because it's what you've always been doing. One of the things that I think is helpful is ask yourself, if you're sending a communication, then you ask yourself, would I be okay with a judge reading this? If you're not okay with a judge reading it, then you definitely should not be writing it. And same thing when you're standing face to face with them. If you're having some sort of problem that you're trying to solve, ask yourself, is the way that I'm about to approach solving this the way the court would want me to? Because if you can keep that in the back of your mind and you truly understand how the court wants you to handle things, then you're never surprised when the other person files a motion, or it's not a problem when you need to file a motion because you're already there, you're already doing it, and it's how everything is already flowing. So if you'd like to learn more about my coaching programs, please go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. Book a free strategy session with me. I'd love to talk to you and find out how I can better support you in your journey. I'll see you guys in the next video.